I'm Paul.
And I'm Andy.
And we are Twisted Rod Garage. Hey guys, we finally have something here at Twisted Rod Garage that isn't a 4.
Today we'll be working on a 2013 Jeep Wrangler. We'll be doing an oil pressure sensor and a wiring harness. This Jeep has your standard 3.6 liter V6 and it's got an engine code of PO520.
What that code means is that we have an oil pressure sensor circuit fault. There's two common problems with this deal. It's either the sensor or the wiring harness. Problem is the sensor's kind of difficult to get to. It's under the intake, and so since we're going to be there, we're actually going to go ahead and replace both today. So what we start off with is we take off the little engine cover. Then we're going to go ahead and start working to get the air intake inlet off. And then now we're going to start working on the upper intake manifold. What we ran into here was there was quite a bit of extra stuff we needed to take off while we were taking off the upper intake manifold. There were some heater hoses. There were some other brackets attached to the upper intake manifold on the driver's side to the top of the exhaust manifold, and also as well on front there were two brackets that we had to remove as well. Then we get to the lower intake manifold, and what we came to find as we were taking it apart was that there was even more we needed to remove. So we went ahead and as you're seeing here, what we're doing is we're working at getting all of the electrical connections loose from the lower intake manifold, because we found it to be easier to remove the entire thing rather than just have it laid to one side like we've seen in several other instances. So we actually unplugged all of the engine harness and all of the injectors and just removed the injectors and the lower intake manifold as a unit. So it took us a little while to get everything loose, but now you can see that the lower intake manifold is getting close to coming off here. Right here, what we're actually removing are the heater core lines that go down to the water pump. We just moved them up out of the way so that we could get those loose and get better access to the lower intake. Now you'll see Andy starting to work on removing. Okay, while Andy works on getting the oil cooler out so we can change that wiring harness, I'm going to work on cleaning up this lower intake, and then I'll work on the upper intake as well. So there's just a ton of dirt and trash from other things, so I'm going to work on cleaning it a little bit.
I don't see one, bro. Alright guys, here we got the oil filter housing and the cooler. You gotta take the cooler off to get to the housing, but you gotta take the housing off to get to the wiring harness. Once you get the wiring harness out and go ahead and replace the wiring harness, before you put the filter back on, you can put your pressure sensor back into place right here before you put your filter housing back into place.
Now this is basically just a reverse of what we did coming apart. So we start off putting the oil filter housing and cooler in, plugging in the wiring harness, and as you go here. Okay, so like I said a second ago, we went back on in the reverse order. We came off in upper intake, lower intake, oil filter, cooler, housing. So to go back on, we went back on oil filter housing, lower intake. Now we're putting the upper intake on and torquing all of those bolts to spec as we go. You'll see that there's a PCV hose that we removed just because it was easier to get it out of the way. We put that back on. We torqued these bolts to spec off camera because we had to go find torque specs on them. So that's where you see some pauses in our video here. And then we're just hooking up all of the vacuum hoses and PCV hoses back to the upper intake, and then plugging back in all of our injectors and wiring harness. Also, we're going to start working here pretty soon on getting our heater core hard lines hooked back up and plugging in all of our sensors. You'll also see that's Andy putting those brackets we were talking about on earlier, about the brackets we removed. You can actually see pretty good that's what he's putting on there, and those two, the two brackets for the upper intake that were attached to it. There's a bracket on the passenger side that holds the factory main wiring harness that we had to remove from the upper intake as well, that we put back there. And now we're fixing to start putting on the air intake inlet for the upper intake manifold. And we're fixing to do a fire up and check it here pretty soon to make sure everything's working. We also checked fluids here, put in a little antifreeze. It was a little low, which was to be expected since we removed those heater core hoses.
All right, we just got done with everything. We're gonna go give her a test drive and see how she goes.
So we went ahead and took it on a test drive. Everything checks out pretty good. Ran our scanner on it, cleared the code for the oil pressure sensor. Everything checks out now. No check engine light, and the oil pressure is working.
Thanks for watching Twisted Rod Garage. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok.
Give us a thumbs up and subscribe, and be on the lookout for new videos and merchandise on social media.